While the animation of Romania didn't get as much international attention as some of the other countries in that part of the world, there's an underappreciated, varied, and highly creative body of work to explore. Romanian animators worked in all sorts of genres, including sci-fi, fantasy, history, drama, and experimental. Very little of it survives from the first half of the 20th century, and Romanian animation really took off in the 1950s and 60s. It grinded to a halt in the 1990s due to political upheaval, but has been slowly coming back ever since. The oldest surviving piece of Romanian animation is Hoplea, a silent black and white short with intertitles. Romanian animation was limited and didn't get foreign attention until decades later with the father of Romanian animation, Ion Popescu-Gopo. His animation career started in the late 40s and spanned into the late 80s. Popescu-Gopo was a huge fan of American animation, but knew he didn't have the resources to emulate those films, so went with a simpler style, and even described his films as anti-Disney. His work was mostly humorous, but also often had a message and satirical edge. His films were experimental and modern, with mixed media touches and metafictional elements, and they were more for adults than children and even a bit disturbing at times. Gopo started with mostly traditional animation, but also dabbled in stop motion later in his career and was the only Romanian animator from the communist era to get significant international acclaim. Gopo's early films were pretty standard in terms of style and not that far off from the look of Disney. In his 1951 short, The Disobedient Duck, we see a duck chase after a butterfly in the water, and while it is stylistically typical of the era, there is the unusual touch of the camera shaking during a POV shot. His 1952 short Two Bunnies features anthropomorphic rabbits that live in a house, talk, and wear clothes. Gopo moved on to humans in the 1953 short Marinica. His 1955 follow-up Marinika's Bodkin has an anthropomorphic screw and shows hints of his future experimentation with mixed media, as it contains brief clips of cutouts. The turning point in his career came in 1956, when his film A Short History won the Short Palme d'Or at Cannes. This was the first appearance of Gopo's Little Man, a very simple, iconic character that contrasts with Disney's realism, as he is a nude man with just 2 dots for eyes. He is intentionally generic and intended to represent the everyman. The film gives a condensed history of the universe beginning with creation, then going through evolution and technological advancement. It starts with depicting the Big Bang as a sneeze, and then dinosaurs roaming the Earth. The little man starts as a monkey before evolving into a human, then inventing music and clothes. After that, he walks up a staircase that represents the progress of history, as his appearance changes to match up with different eras. A Short History ends with space exploration and the depiction of planets and rocket ships. Gopo's next short, The Seven Arts, takes a small part of A Short History and runs with it. In A Short History, the little man invented music, but The Seven Arts shows the invention of various art forms. Gopo's little man creates theater, literature, dance, and music to distract dinosaurs. He comes up with architecture to protect himself from rocks, even making Greek-style columns, and accidentally invents visual art. At the end, the film zooms out, and like A Short History, we see outer space and planets. But unlike that film, The Seven Arts gets metafictional when the camera zooms out even further, showing the film strip and depicting cinema itself. There's also a tiny bit of mixed media, with the usage of real paper to portray a printing press. Gopo's 1960 short Homo sapiens was similar to Short Story in showing evolution, and the little man makes a hatchet out of rocks and wields it to attack animals and chop trees. The short has yet another metafictional ending when the little man sees a rocket and the film stops. He looks down to the next frame of the film strip, sees an explosion, and decides to do things differently. Like both A Short History and The Seven Arts, it ends in space. The 1962 short Hello, Hello dramatizes communications in a nutshell, as the on-screen text states. It portrays methods of communication like hieroglyphs, typewriter, telephone, telegraph, and finally satellites, which of course gives Gopo an excuse to depict heavenly bodies. We again see a film strip, and metafiction was quite common among Eastern European animation of this era. There are also parts where the background is entirely blank, another common technique of Eastern Europeans in the 1960s. In the mid-1960s, Gopo started making extremely short works, about a minute in length, that he called pill films. 2 compilations were released, and in the second, Gopo again gets metafictional, when his little man constructs an image of Gopo himself with collage bit by bit, until Gopo comes alive and starts cutting up the little man with scissors. Gopo's 1974 film Intermezzo for an Eternal Love depicts the destruction of nature, but also largely takes place in space, and here the planets are even sentient and have faces. 3 years later, he made Infinite, one of his more enigmatic films. The little man comes up with mathematics and then floats around in space, de-aging into a child and back again, repeatedly, before multiplying infinitely. That same year, Gopo directed his most disturbing short yet, Ecce Homo. It's mixed media with photos and live-action footage, most notably stark clips of corpses and violence. It also gets psychedelic for a bit and partly takes place on the moon. Gopo's 1979 short, The Three Apples, was much more lighthearted and appears to be a warning about an over-reliance on technology. In the 80s, Gopo experimented with a new style and made unique stop-motion using various unusual objects, like pencils, pins, and an egg in And Yet It Moves, and chains in Frame by Frame. His 1985 short, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, combines live-action, stop-motion, and 2D animation. Gopo also started directing features in the 80s, and in 1981 he directed the first Romanian animated feature film to be shown in Romania, Maria Mirabella, which combines cell animation with live action. The animated characters and real humans interact and talk to each other, but are rarely shown in the same frame, which is obviously more difficult to pull off. The animated characters are a trio of talking animals, a frog, firefly, and butterfly. They meet two little girls and go on an adventure that involves a forest fairy and Father Time, the latter played by Gopo himself. Maria Mirabella was quite successful, being seen by over 2 million Romanians, as well as 8 million Soviets, and receiving awards at international festivals. That was followed by a sequel in 1989, called Maria and Mirabella in Transistoria, and this time the title characters enter a world that exists inside the television set. However, it was not quite as popular or appreciated as the first film. The adventures of Gopo's little man also continued in the 1980s with shorts such as Sports Humor, which consists of quick little vignettes that each make jokes related to a sport. In Boat, the little man rows in front of maps as backgrounds. And finally, the short Footprint revisits a familiar theme when the little man makes some cave art and includes collage using photos and live action. A filmmaker with a completely different style was Sabin Balasha, whose career began in the 1960s. He was actually more known for his painting, which explored cosmic and mythological themes. He painted large murals and was so popular that he even did commissions for Nicolae Ceausescu, the leader of communist Romania from the 1960s until his regime was overthrown in 1989. Balasha was also a writer of novels and essays on art. His animated films were cryptic, surreal, and wordless, and produced using paint on glass, resulting in a unique style. His first animated short was The Drop from 1966, which includes an odd-looking human airplane hybrid, and flight would go on to be a recurring theme in his films. It moves in an unnatural, uncanny way, which was also a trademark of Balasha's style. There's more flight-related iconography in his 1968 film The Wave, with a winged female figure. He incorporates birds and creatures transforming repeatedly in his shorts The Phoenix Bird, Fascinations, Return to the Future, and Ode. And then in his last film, Exodus Towards Light, from 1979, he finally uses more modern iconography like the Statue of Liberty and Eiffel Tower. Also starting in the 1960s was Nel Kobar's Mihaela TV series, which began in 1968 and lasted until 1989. The lighthearted dialogue-free show was about a little girl with pigtails and very long legs, was full of silly hijinks, and adapted stories such as Snow White. The most notable female Romanian animator of the communist era was Luminița Cazacu, whose Odysseus and Penelope series ran from 1976 to 1981. It was about the main character of the Odyssey and his wife, but filled with anachronisms. The series had a feminist subtext, dealt with gender issues, and was more for adults than children. It also contained mixed media by utilizing photographs. She also created the cartoon penguin named Pinpin, who first appeared in Adventures of Pinpin, a series for kids that aired from 1986 to 1989. And then in 1990, she directed Pinpin's Travels, a feature that starred the cartoon penguin and included bits of live action. Here, Pinpin goes all around the world and sees various animals, like camels, walruses, and giraffes. Animator Victor Antonescu also got his start in the 1970s, directing what could be considered the first Romanian animated feature film, depending on how you look at it. Robinson Crusoe, an adaptation of the 1917 Daniel Defoe novel, was produced in 1973. Since the studio was not allowed to make animated features, it was made as a series of episodes. However, while the Italian co-production was shown in Italy, it was not allowed to be released in Romania by the state. The claimed reason was that the portrayal of the natives the title character interacts with as cannibals was seen as racist. However, Antonescu stated it was actually Gopo who insisted the film be banned because he thought he should have the right to make the first Romanian animated feature. Robinson Crusoe was not made available until 1990, after the revolution that led to the fall of communism. Antonescu was also in charge of production of a science fiction series called Delta Space Mission. This was then compiled and edited into the first fully animated Romanian feature film to be released domestically, also titled Delta Space Mission. The feature version, directed by the duo Călin Cazan and Mircea Toia, included about 20 minutes of new footage and a new soundtrack. Set in the far future of 3084, the 1984 film is teeming with bizarre creatures and landscapes, and uses rotoscoping, where live-action footage is animated over, placing it visually in the vein of cult animation such as Fantastic Planet, Heavy Metal, and the work of Ralph Bakshi. There's violence, but it's bloodless and not very disturbing, so it's more acceptable for kids than some of those films. Delta Space Mission is more fun and lighthearted than those sometimes quite dark films. The movie's wild and psychedelic visual style is complemented by a synth score inspired by progressive rock and European disco. The visuals and music combine for a hypnotic, surprisingly calming feel. Delta Space Mission's animation ranges from simple to complex. Many figures are drawn with little detail, but at times we even see beads of sweat on a face. Due to restrictions on the production of feature films, this was made as episodes by different filmmakers, resulting in some inconsistency in character designs. Despite the addition of new scenes, the end result is still a fractured episodic narrative. Delta Space Mission was loosely based on an 1883 Romanian poem that deals with forbidden love, and changes that tale to be about a sentient computer falling in love with a living woman, making it an interesting blend of sci-fi and fairy tale. The use of an AI gone wrong has invited many comparisons to 2001: A Space Odyssey, but that's about where the similarities end. The recipient of the AI's affection is an alien journalist with green skin, with a cute metal-eating animal sidekick that seems sort of like a cross between a dog and a frog. As film critic Kat Ellinger points out on the Blu-ray commentary, the adorable non-human sidekick that follows the protagonist around is something straight out of Disney films, and was pretty rare in Eastern European animation. Like basically all 1980s sci-fi, this was inspired by Star Wars, most obviously in the space station that resembles the Death Star. There's also a Star Trek influence in the film's multicultural crew, which implies that society is united and moved past bigotry. The aesthetic of Delta Space Mission was also reminiscent of early anime, as well as illustrations from pulp science fiction magazines, which fell out of fashion about 3 decades before this film was made. Kazan and Toia followed that up with another science fiction feature, The Son of the Stars. Similar in style to Delta Space Mission, it was also hypnotic and psychedelic, but contains more obvious and extensive rotoscoping. The Son of the Stars was set even farther in the future in the year 6470, and like so much science fiction, it starts off with a distress call. The call causes a husband and wife to get lost in space, leaving their child, named Dan, to be raised by a sentient AI named Bob that controls the spaceship. Bob is depicted as a giant brain and often compared to the Mother Brain from the Metroid video game series, which debuted 2 years before this film was released. Dan is found by a group of telekinetic aliens that raise him and teach him how to control objects with his mind. Their telepathic communication and the film's frequent narration mean that we rarely see mouths move when characters speak, presumably making things easier on the animators. The protagonist eventually has to go up against a godlike, Lovecraftian cosmic entity that can alter reality. There's all sorts of strange stuff throughout, such as a sword battle with a knight, dragons, giant eyeballs, and time travel. The Son of the Stars was visually inventive and gets kaleidoscopic multiple times. And like so much of Romanian animation, there's even a tiny bit of mixed media in a scene that uses real photographs. Like Delta Space Mission, this was originally made as a series of short episodes, and fades to black where the seam czars show up throughout. Also like Delta Space Mission, this was influenced by Star Wars, and the main character looks like Luke Skywalker and has similar story beats, while Kazan specifically cited Empire Strikes Back as an influence. He also stated he was inspired by Tarzan and the Jungle Book, which makes sense as a boy gets orphaned and is raised by a different species. Kazan also said they were influenced by Hanna-Barbera, and this shows up in the creature design. The aliens that take care of the protagonist look vaguely like Shmoos, comic strip creatures created by Al Cap, as well as Orko from Masters of the Universe. These two films came at the end of an era for animated science fiction. They were earnest space operas in the vein of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, but Son of the Stars was released the same year as the seminal anime film Akira, which ushered in the age of cynical cyberpunk dystopias. Victor Antonescu's career continued into the late 80s with the compilation film The Amazing Adventures of the Musketeers. In this version of the classic novel, the Musketeers are mice, and there are also talking dogs and cats. The tone is comedic throughout, and the film is full of typical cartoon gags such as violent chases and a sentient smell trail that entices a character to follow it. Tatiana Apahidanu's cute 1974 short The Gingerbread Girl was created with stop-motion animating actual cookies as well as cutouts. A cone comes alive and decorates cookies with icing, and the title character melts in the rain. Mihail Badika directed some stop-motion shorts in the 1970s and 80s, like the dialogue-free claymation short Icarus. Isabella Petroshenko's 1987 film Balls of Wool Story featured characters made of wool. It's reminiscent of and possibly inspired by the work of Czech animator Hermina Tirlova. Liana Petruțiu's animated shorts include the mixed media The Book That Caught a Cold from 1987 and Taking a Walk on the Moon from the following year, where kids fly up to the moon with balloons. The 1988 feature-length film The Rookies is significantly more realistic than most of the animation in this video. It was a historical film set in the 16th century and featured fantasy elements, but was definitely aimed at adults, with extensive depiction of bloody violence in battle against the Ottomans. The revolution took place in 1989, and the following decade in Romania was marked by economic hardship and social unrest, so there was no animation produced in the entirety of the 1990s. In the first decade of the 21st century, Romanian animation slowly started coming back. A handful of shorts were made in the 2000s, and one standout was Mircea Purda's creepy abstract liminal introspect. The most notable director of animation in the 21st century has been Anca Damian. Her first animated feature was titled Krulik, The Path to Beyond, and released in 2011, making it the first Romanian animated feature film in 20 years. Krulik is an animated documentary about a Romanian man who was imprisoned in Poland and went on a hunger strike before dying in custody, and is just as sad and depressing as it sounds. Often described as Kafkaesque, Damian's film harshly criticizes the corrupt, uncaring bureaucracy that allowed this tragedy to take place. The film is mixed media, with the inclusion of news footage and photographs, and uses many different styles, such as cutout, hand-drawn, stop-motion, and 3D. The look of the film is constantly changing from scene to scene, with parts that look like watercolor and extensive usage of collage. 4 years later, Damian directed The Magic Mountain. Like Krulik, it has documentary elements and utilized real footage to tell the story of a Polish refugee who went to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. Damian's 2019 feature, Marona's Fantastic Tale, tells the story of a dog and her various owners. Like Krulik, this centers on a character you know is dead from the beginning, as the film opens with the dog's death and then flashes back to tell her life story. This is Damian's most visually stunning film yet, teeming with vibrant colors, and like Krulik, the look is constantly changing, ranging from very simple to very detailed and complex. There's no attempt at realism, and characters have skin with unnatural colors like gray, blue, and yellow. The film also uses both digital and analog animation, as well as both cell and stop motion. Tonally, the mature, empathetic film ranges from melancholy to joyful, and it explores topics such as abandonment and the fleeting nature of life. Marona's Fantastic Tale easily could have been overly saccharine, cutesy, or cheesy, but it avoids cliches. Damian then went in a more lighthearted, humorous direction with her 2021 feature, The Island, which was a loose reinterpretation of the novel Robinson Crusoe. Moving on to other modern filmmakers, the family-oriented feature film Mercy Street was released in 2016 and follows the journey of a young boy who finds a passage to another world. The following year saw the release of Sergiu Negulici's unique and interesting 15-minute short, The Blissful Accidental Death. It begins with 2D animation using cutouts with very bare environments, and moves on to the more detailed 3D animation depicting surreal events. This surrealism fits with the content of the short as it references the Dada art movement, which was a precursor to surrealism. Another Romanian animator who started directing around the same time is Sergei Chiviriga, whose 2017 creepy and violent short The Best Customer used both stop-motion and traditional animation. He then explored gender identity in the highly suggestive 2023 short Sasha. Director Alina Gheorghe dealt with eating disorders in a metaphorical way in the surreal, disturbing short Glass Fingers from 2023, where a woman somehow creates octopuses by scooping out chunks of her body. There have also been some animated web series from Romania like Robotsi, Two for Nothing, and Mishu and Ionica. If you'd like to watch these films in full, many works of Romanian animation from any of these eras are available to watch for free online. If there are any specific ones you're looking for, let me know in the comments and I'll send you a link. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and please check out my Patreon, which I'll link to in the description. If there are any other countries you'd like me to cover the animation of, feel free to suggest them in the comments.